This is the Lancia Fulvia 1600 HF, a car that almost became a synonym with what a Lancia from the 70s would mean. A car that teenagers from Italy would admire on their walls on their bedroom, and from time to time would go outside and see a derivative of it running in a rally. It is a car created when Lancia was great, but made Lancia even greater, acclaimed all over the world. So there must be something truly special in it. Today we are going to discover the intriguing story and engineering of a Lancia Fulvia 1600 HF and explore the car near me. Because I'm Toma and you are watching Timeless Driving.
Yes, this is one of the Lancia's most desired jewels from its entire history, and I was fortunate to find one in the town of Toffen in Switzerland, and not only to explore it but also drive it. Well, let us do a short dive into the history to understand what exactly Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1600 HF is. You see, Lancia had decades of glory, which is hard to comprehend by looking at the modern models of the last 10 years or so. But Lancia used to be one of the most daring and innovative car manufacturers in the world, with brilliant engineers for a very long time. In 1959, Lancia changed its owner, and Antonio Fesia, the brand's technical director, promised a new era of cars, spreading the genius engineering to more segments, making them more affordable but with an even greater passion. Soon after that, in 1961, Flavia appeared, and then in 1963, another model was launched. It was the Fulvia. But it was a more practical four-door saloon at first, and it had only V4 engines under the bonnet, which were the necessary spice to set this car apart and make it joyful to ride. Then Lancia came to the idea that it would be wonderful to create a two-door coupe in the Fulvia range to appeal to younger customers and to win their hearts. And Piero Castaniero was a designer that got the mission to draw the new coupe. He took his inspiration from Riva motorboats, as he later was quoted to say, especially from the upper counter of those that was replicated on the car. The windows of the coupe were larger, the windshield was more inclined, and of course the proportions were magnificent, although it had more chrome and was more elegant than what we see here today in the HF version. At first the engine was a 1.2-liter V4 producing 80 horsepower. Only later came the 1.3 and 1.6-liter engines. So what is HF here? Well, at Lancia, HF stands for high fidelity, and HF models were always closer to a raw, sporty feeling of motorsport. In 1963, Lancia had its Quadra Corse team relaunched, and it was headed by Cesare Fiorio, with him also being the team driver. And the new coupe, launched in 1965, got his attention as one of the best candidates to have rally versions of the car developed from it. Until that year, the team has been run mostly on the enthusiasm of its members with little factory support. In 1965, Fiorio managed to get the full factory support and incorporation as an official factory team. The same year, the first Fulvia Coupe participated in Tour de Corse without too many modifications and took 8th place. That meant Fulvia Coupe deserved even more efforts from the engineers. The first Fulvia Coupe HF as a public model was launched in 1966, and it had the 1.2-liter engine, staying less than 2 years in production until it was followed in 1968 by the Fulvia Coupe 1.3 HF. That car had 101 horsepower, and eventually that engine also went to the rally car. But the 1.6-liter engine was conceived the other way around, the right way. That meant developing it for motorsport first and then putting it also into a publicly sold model. So the 1.6-liter made its debut in the rally in 1967, racing as a prototype until 1969 when FIA finally homologated it. So only in 1969 a new Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1.6 HF was launched for the public. This was finally the car that became to be called Fanalone because of its large headlamps. And a much rougher appearance, by the way, with no bumpers.
It is one of the cars you look at and immediately want to drive it.
But what we actually explore today here in Switzerland is the second series of the model, after the facelift. The first series has been produced in 1,288 units. The second series changed its name from Fulvia Coupe Rallye 1.6 HF to Fulvia Coupe 1600. The performance was the same.
If you had the impression that Japanese manufacturers were the first to make front-wheel drive popular, actually French and Italians have made it much earlier. And you wouldn't believe that this sporty Lancia is front-wheel drive.
I mean, of course, Lancia fans know that this was a front-wheel drive car, as all the Fulvias and Flavias, because Lancia was one of the pioneers in the front-wheel drive cars. But when you look at this car and think of its motorsport heritage, it is easy to forget that actually in the 1960s, rally competitions were challenged by front-wheel drive cars since the first Minis.
Only a rigid axle at the back for a car model that has won the World Rally Championship in 1972.
Yes, in 1972, a similar Lancia Fulvia Coupe 1600 HF made Lancia even greater when it gained the victory at Monte Carlo Rally with Sandro Munari and Mario Manucci in the team. From that day and that year, Lancia enjoyed a new period of an even stronger glory. Following victories in that year brought Lancia the 1972 International Championship for Manufacturers, and this model gained its legend status.
Okay, let's see the secret Italian ingredients hidden under the bonnet. You see, it is a V4 engine, but it is mounted in front of the axle at a 45-degree angle. The two-cylinder banks were so closed that one single cylinder head covers all the cylinders, and there is only one cam driving intake and exhaust valves.
This engine delivered 115 horsepower from 1.6 liters without any turbine. It is a power-to-displacement ratio that was achieved by other manufacturers only about 30 years later. Two Solex carburetors were responsible for preparing the mixture, and this engine was always ready to achieve 6000 RPMs. And if you want to know the firing order for such an unusual engine, I found it in an old book. 1-3-4-2, cylinder numeration being 1-3 on the left bank and 2-4 on the right one.
This car near me was manufactured in 1972, the same year Lancia Fulvia won the World Rally Championship. It is a second series built only in 3,690 examples. It was first delivered to Italy, and only in the mid-2000s the car was imported to US. After 10 years, in 2014, the car was imported again in Europe, arriving in Switzerland, where it stayed until now. Let's have a look inside this Lancia Fulvia 1600 HF.
You had the rev counter and speedometer much bigger than the other dials, but you also had oil pressure indicator among the smaller ones, always in front of your eyes. And on the right part of the dashboard there was also an oil temperature indicator.
This is what the sporty spirit of Lancia looked in 1970s. Why can't we have a Lancia made with the same passion today?
The sport seats were a feature only for the Fulvia Coupe 1600 HF, just as the wider wheel arches on the outside. These seats provide quite a good lateral support, I must say. The car is tiny, having only 2.33 meters in wheelbase, but it fits you like a glove, although the seating position is quite unique.
The most important moment is here. Let us start the legendary V4 engine.
You know, this twin carburetor engine dislikes being just awakened and kept at the idle speed. It demands high RPMs. It demands breathing, reaching 5-6,000 RPMs and delivering pure joy. So I had absolutely no other option, to my happiness, than to go and drive it. Drive the legendary Lancia car. I had to pinch myself to be sure I was not dreaming.
Well, the first impression is that this car is like a toy. It is so small and so compact and so nimble that you feel it right away from the first meter and you want to push it to the limits.
handles surprisingly well if I'm thinking of the rigid axle at the rear. But here, the low weight of little more than 900 kilos and the good balance makes it all.
It's so nimble and so nice to drive. It's a different position in any other car. It's a specific to this model. You see differently, you hold the steering wheel differently, but it all makes the whole experience much more fun. Yeah. And I wouldn't believe that this car is front wheel drive and with such a simple in essence suspension at the rear. But you know, that's a physics, that's a thing when you do everything right from the start and you care about balancing and putting everything in the right place. Even with front wheel drive, you can make a great car that becomes a legend. Wow, this sound! Fourth and fifth.
The gearbox has 5 speed in this model, and the second and third are in one line to offer the driver convenient handling of the gearbox in sharp curves where you need the second and then the third most of all, or in the real rally competitions of course.
It sounds so great at higher RPMs.
The more I revved up this Lancia, the greater it sounded. This car was not created for strict speed limits and for keeping any constant speed. The whole joy here is revving, and revving means accelerating. So I caught myself again and again letting the car decelerate just to have the space and certain speed limit reserve to accelerate again. This car is created for the freedom of empty roads, curvy roads of Sicily or sharp serpentines of the Alps. It is amazing what it can do with front wheel drive and a rigid axle at the rear.
This engine is gorgeous, this car is so light. The whole experience is like getting into another dimension of physics. And you remember that sometimes if a car is light enough, you actually don't need so much power. You can handle it much more easy. So less power is sometimes enough. Driving Lancia Fulvia 1600 HF on Alpine, on mountain roads is actually one of the best experiences as a driver you could imagine. It is a legend and that says it all. And if you have the opportunity to drive it on such roads, the whole experience becomes a day not to be forgotten in your life.
Yes, a day not to be forgotten in your life if you drive it once like me. But if you are one of the happy owners of one of the few thousand cars of this iteration that have been produced and survived to this date, then the unforgettable days are countless, and it eventually brings that special condiment in your life, defining what living tastefully means. And these Italian classics know a thing or two in what a perfect taste is. Thank you Castaniero, thank you Fiorio, Fessia, Pesenti, Munari, Manucci and all those tens of engineers and designers at Lancia that made this car possible more than 5 decades ago. We often forget to pay the due respect to them for what they have created. This car was a precursor for the great Lancia Stratos and then Lancia 037 in rallies and later Delta HF Integrale. And this Fulvia Coupe 1600 HF is a symbol of a time when Lancia was one of the most desired cars on the planet.